Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math in Metal Gear Solid, one of my favorite games of all time. Now, there are a lot of games in the Metal Gear franchise, and I could have talked about any of them. I could have talked about the franchise as a whole. But I wanted to actually focus in on Metal Gear Solid, partially because it is one of my favorite games of all time, but also because it is one of the most important games in the entire series, if not the most important game in the entire series. And hopefully, when you're done watching this video, you'll get where I'm coming from with that. And you'll also see how math is used in Metal Gear Solid. With that in mind, here's how I see this going. I'm going to talk about Metal Gear Solid and how math is used in its gameplay, in its world, in its production, development, and even more. So I'm going to have fun with it. I hope you do too. And throughout this video, I'm going to talk about my experiences with Metal Gear Solid. And like the franchise on a whole, but mostly Metal Gear Solid. Because it was a very meaningful game for me, very impactful. It still sticks with me. So yeah, let's get into it. And before we do though, spoilers ahead. I will actually try to keep the spoilers light, but you should assume all the spoilers if you're really, really cautious. That being said, if you don't mind, then let's get into it. Let's have some fun. And if you wanted to wait on this video, hey, when you get to it, if you do get to it, same deal, right? So here we go. Metal Gear Solid, to me, it's such an amazing game. Very, very pivotal as far as gaming is concerned. And I say that for a couple of reasons, right? Like, one, it redefined the stealth action genre, which I'd argue the first Metal Gear created. But Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 weren't horribly known worldwide. And we wouldn't actually get ports of those games, or proper ports of those games, until Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence came out. We got some weird versions. One was kind of a butchered Metal Gear, and one was a non-canon Metal Gear game. But maybe more on that later. So anyway, Metal Gear Solid is known for several things, some good and some bad, but the main thing is that it redefined the stealth action genre. And it's arguably the game that made it well known. Like, you can't think, hey, stealth game, and not think Metal Gear Solid. And the other big thing it's known for is its cinematics, which later games people kind of got tired of because they felt like they were too long. But I've played, well, pretty much all of the games, and it's fine. But yeah, so it's known for those two things, and we'll touch on the cinematics later. But let's get into the gameplay part, right? So what's interesting about Metal Gear Solid is, at its core, that gameplay, that stealth gameplay where you're going around and you're sneaking, you're laying traps, you're knocking guards unconscious, or you're moving around them, or in some cases just killing them. Whatever you decide to do, the way that all functions, that was established in Metal Gear and refined in Metal Gear 2. And what I find interesting is it took what was done in the 2D world and it brought that to the 3D world. And right off the bat, its existence is such an excellent example of math, right? You're going from 2D to 3D, and there's so much that comes with that. So much math in there. And then, like, as far as the gameplay is concerned, right? Like, you're moving through this environment and that environment, and you have to have a good sense of where Snake is and where the guards are and what patterns the guards are following, right? So there's a lot of math in that, right? There's a lot of geometry, there's a lot of physics, and there's math in all of that. There's math in the patterns, and you have to have a good judgment of where you are and where there are, and it gets to be pretty cool because you're automatically adjusting in your mind. You're not physically writing things out on the paper like, oh, well, I'm this amount of feet from the guard. You're not looking at your TV screen and saying, okay, so my TV screen is this big and Snake is moving like this amount or that amount, And so if I take that and I scale up to how it would be in real life, this is what it is. You're not doing any of that on paper, but your brain's doing it. Your brain is adjusting. Your brain is doing the math. You're doing the math. And that's really cool. And so the other thing is like, right, you have weapons and items that you're using throughout the game. And with the weapons, you have a certain amount of ammo, and you have a certain amount of this item or that item. But the ammo part, I think that's where it's more clear to see the math, because some items are just like one-offs where you're like, oh, well, I just have this item. Like you might have the thermal goggles. You can't get two thermal goggles. But anyway, right? So you have your items, you have your weapons, and then you also have your health, right? Like you have a certain amount of health at the beginning of the game. And what I think is interesting about Metal Gear Solid is that a couple things happen, right? Each time you fight a boss, your maximum health increases as well as your ammo capacity. And that's interesting. That's fascinating to me, right? Because of course things are going to get difficult as you progress through the game, and also um, these things get changed depending on which difficulty you're playing on. So for Metal Gear Solid, like I played that game on all the difficulties, so it's interesting to see how they change the numbers and to give you a challenge, or more of a challenge, and they change certain things here and there. But anyway, so as far as your health is concerned, right, you have your bar for that, and you can get a good sense of where you are on that bar. It's like, oh well, I'm taking this amount of damage, so I'm seeing like this percentage of my health points dropping off. I need to adjust this or I need to adjust that, or hey, I have a certain amount of like rations, right? Like maybe at one point in the game I have just like two, and so it's like I gotta be careful, I gotta be strategic. Um, and I'd rather not use my rations on guards, but it also depends on your gameplay, right? And it's fascinating because you're using math throughout all that. You might be thinking, okay, so here's the thing, right? Like, let's say I'm playing on normal difficulty. Things are going to be somewhat challenging, and I have to be careful with what I'm doing, right? Because I'm sneaking through the base. If I'm not careful, then what happens, right? A guard could get alerted. Now I can take out that guard, but it's gonna cost me some ammunition, right? And if that guard's getting some hits in, or they call other people and they're getting hits in, that's gonna take away my health, and I'm gonna be running through my rations if I have them. And so then maybe I don't have as much when I get to a boss fight, which is going to be tougher. So I have to be careful, right? There's an element of resource management here, and going through the game, you have to be clever. Or you might get some other items where you're like, hey, maybe I can lay a trap, you know and they give you, like, even in Metal Gear Solid, just like by itself, because like in later games there's a lot more that you could do, but even within Metal Gear Solid there's some things that you could do that can kind of get crafty, right? Like you can lay mines out, or you could put a C4 on a guard's back and then like go to a distance and detonate it, and then yeah, you're definitely causing an alert, but you can sneak up on your opponents. Or with the mines, you can get far away and let havoc rain. But that's if you're playing with the idea of like killing the guards, but in a crafty way, right? Because there are a couple of different ways you could play. You could try your hand at being completely stealthy. You can go in guns blazing, and that's going to make things more challenging. Or you can go in with this idea of like, hey, I'm not going to be stealth. Sorry, I'm going to be stealthy, but I'm still going to kill the guards. So I guess a better way to do it is like stealthy, killing the guards, stealthy, not killing the guards, or rather like stealthy, no kill, or any modification of that. God, my thoughts. But anyway, so those two ways, but also just kind of going in guns blazing, and then there's just anything and everything in between and outside of those things. My point is though that you have your basic objectives that you're figuring out in the game, right? You're playing as Solid Snake and you're going through Shadow Moses. You're meeting teammates or people that you partner up with throughout the game, like Merrill and Otacon, and you have your support staff, right? And all that stuff works. But outside of that, and outside of just like with the idea of you being someone who's sneaking around the base, they don't necessarily tell you how to play. And even though you get a lot more options in later titles, in Metal Gear Solid, you have a lot of chances to be creative. You have a lot of chances to just kind of run around and experiment and play around with the guard patterns and what you want to do. And like if you have something like the pistol, like you can get a silencer. There's even like a machine gun that you could also get a silencer on if you look. So you know you can explore the areas, and there's a lot of math in all of that. And then there's a lot of math in the world itself. Because at the end of the day, there's math on an academic level, which you use in the classrooms, on the jobs, etc. And all that is that's an extension of what the universe is already doing. So there's that universal math, and I feel like whatever game that you're going to be inhabiting, you're going to be living in a world where there's going to be math. So math is used everywhere and anywhere in that game. But if we want to be specific on the more academic side of things or more professional side of math, um, there's a lot of science in this game. Constructing the Metal Gear, constructing weapons and all that good stuff. So there's a lot of math that comes into play there, or at least like the math as we know it. And then there's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of systems of control to talk about that they go into like in later games. But there's so much that's actually connected and so much math that goes into all of that. And it's interesting. And I could talk more about that, but I think it's just worth saying that their world, the world of Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear in general is based off for ours. Just it's more sci-fi ish, right? And whether you're talking about math on that academic and professional level or math on a universal level, it's going to show up, right? It's connecting that world like it connects our world. So we talked about the gameplay a bit. We talked about the world itself, and I wanted to point out, like, so when Metal Gear Solid was being made, right? There's a lot of math that goes into actually making it, right, and how it functions and how it works. There's a lot of math that went into building that world. There's a lot of geometry, a lot of physics, a lot of programming, and there's math in all of that. And everyone had to work together. You had your artists, you had your composers, you had a translation team, right? You had to work with voice actors. You have, director, producer, everyone working together to make this game. And there's a lot of math in it. There's a lot of math in the logistics, and there's a lot of math in the individual titles, right? And then there's a lot of math and the money, because right, it's a game. They want to make money. Kojima, wanted to make art, and Konami let him. And so I think that was for the best. And there's a lot of money in Metal Gear Solid for Kojima and Konami, and it all worked out. And so what I think it's interesting though is like if you can start like looking at it in like the other series. One, Metal Gear Solid is a series kept on going on because Kojima kept on putting out quality stuff that people were buying. So there's a lot of money in that, and there's a lot of math in it. And then as far as how Metal Gear Solid kind of ties everything together and why I say it's so important, in addition to just like being one of the first games to be like truly cinematic, it was also this really good bridge between the material that came before it and the material that came after it. Because you had Metal Gear, you had Metal Gear 2. There was a non-canon game, Snake's Revenge, but we're not gonna get into that too much. But you're free to look it up. But anyway, Metal Gear came, and then Metal Gear 2 refined things from Metal Gear. It added things to it, and I honestly would say that it added more to the story. Like there was a story in Metal Gear, but 2 added a little bit more depth into it. And so then Metal Gear Solid comes along, and not only does it add more story to it, but it adds, more depth just overall. Like everything came together in a great way because just like deeper story, but deeper visuals, deeper way to connect to everything. And it was pretty much taking what worked from Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, taking that from 2D and then making it work for 3D. And the way they do that, I think, is really cool because they kind of, they do that top-down perspective. So it still feels 2D in a sense, even though it's 3D. And that first one, they do give you a chance to like look through first person. Although in the original Metal Gear Solid, you can't shoot in first person. That's something that will come like later on. Um, but it's pretty cool, and there's like some VR missions that you can practice, and that gets trippy. There's a lot of math in that, and that works for inside the universe and outside of it too. So that's pretty cool. You could actually get Metal Gear Solid VR missions separately, and that's pretty cool. And if you I think what I don't know if it was in any other place other than Japan, but you can get Metal Gear Solid Integral. That was the thing that happened that we unfortunately didn't get, but it was pretty much Metal Gear Solid and VR missions packaged together. But anyway, back to why it's important for Metal Gear Solid. It took what worked for 2D and made it 3D and turned everything up to 11 pretty much. So it took that story, amped it up, added more. It used everything that came before it, and it took 2D and made it 3D, and that's really slick, and there's a lot of math in it. And then if you look at the games that came after it, right, there's like some core gameplay mechanics that don't really go away in Metal Gear Solid, so each game is refining those and making those smoother, but also adding new gameplay mechanics, and there's a lot of math in all of that. So, Metal Gear Solid 2, they're doing their thing, and, they're adding. And that's what's going on in each of those games. They're adding this or they're adding that, and they might subtract a few things. But then focusing back on Metal Gear Solid, there's also math within the story, right? Like how it's structured, and how long it is. And that's pretty cool. And one of the things that I liked about Metal Gear Solid is it works as kind of like a one-off, right? It works as like a one-off story. It's connected to everything else, and it's important, but it works on its own. Because see, here's the thing, right? You didn't have to play Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 to enjoy Metal Gear Solid. I personally didn't play them at first because I didn't know they were a thing. I later played ports of them that I got on Subsistence. When that was where I even got Subsistence in the first place. But back then, all I had were descriptions of the events from Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 and Metal Gear Solid. And it didn't hurt the game. Like, you had characters from the old games, but like you didn't say, "Oh my God, I really needed to play that." It's more like, "Oh, okay, so they had some backstory," and that's no different from some stories where you're just starting in the middle anyway. But my whole thing is like it didn't hurt, and so then you did have stories after that, right? And stories that take place before it. But while they're fun, it's like you could have played Metal Gear Solid and have been just perfectly happy if that was your only Metal Gear experience, and I think that's great because I don't think the other games really function that way. Like you can play except for 3, but with 1, I feel like it just really takes it all together. But even with 3, even though I do think that can work as a standalone as well, knowing who Big Boss is in comparison to Snake really helps. So I do think Metal Gear Solid edges it out. And then what's fascinating is even though Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 came first, they weren't the ones to get the remake. Metal Gear Solid was, in terms of like Twin Snakes, which brought it to the GameCube, which is cool. Like I still want to see remakes of Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, but I was glad to play Twin Snakes. Now, when I go and I revisit Metal Gear Solid, I still play the original, just because it's just like it has so much meaning to me. But Twin Snakes was good, and I have played that more than once. Yeah, so now that I've talked about math and how it's used in like the Metal Gear Solid, I want to talk about like more what it means to me and the franchise as a whole, but mostly Metal Gear Solid. Now I mentioned it in like some other videos, but those are other videos. I want to mention it here and maybe go a little in depth. So when I got Metal Gear Solid, I was 15. And back then they didn't really card you, so I was able to get that rated M game without like issue. That changed like 2 years after that. But by that point I was old enough. But anyway, I got it with when I was 15. And what's really, really cool is I only paid like maybe $6 for it. And not only did I get a game where I played it like a million times, so I got my bang for my buck there, but I also got something that was deep, that was meaningful to me, that was art, that spoke to me. Because when I was 15, I was going through a lot. I had a lot going on in my life, and I was deeply cynical, very nihilistic. And while I do struggle with nihilism and cynicism still, I have a better handle on it now. But back then, it was new to me because, I was just like, I was this happy kid that just started thinking about everything very differently. Like, why was I here? What was my actual purpose? And if I was going to die someday, what was the point of this all? Right? That's what plagued me then. And again, like, I still think about that stuff from time to time. But I think of it this way now, like, we create our own purpose. And at the time that I played Metal Gear Solid, I didn't come to that yet. But here's how it helped me. With Metal Gear Solid, you were dealing with a bunch of characters that were in the same spot. They were in the same spot as me. They were these characters that they wondered what their purpose was. They wondered why they were there. They were like me. They had to struggle being anywhere else than the now. And that was cool for a couple reasons. It was cool seeing like characters that could relate to something that I was currently going through at the time, and have that be like a crucial part to the story. And it was also just cool because at that time, I hadn't really seen that in the game, right? Like, I grew up gaming. I've been gaming since I was 6. And that was just, like, as far as I know. It could go back further. But the whole point is, like, at that point, right? Like, I had been gaming for going on 10 years. And while that was the case, I didn't really see a story that heavy, that deep before. And so it was nice to see that, and nice to see characters that could relate to me. And I played that game like a million times. To the point that when I played Twin Snakes, I could spot the differences in the dialogue. Like, so if they remove something or tweak the line, I could tell. Because that's how much I played Metal Gear Solid back in the day. And so it was a very important game to me. Because, it didn't cure my nihilism, but it was nice to, see that somewhere. Because for me, I hadn't really seen that in other media at the time. I hadn't really seen that in life at the time. It was very new to me. And it was a struggle going through it. Still is. But, like, I'm in a much better place than I was back then. But at the time, man, did that game come in handy. And what was really cool is, like, these characters, they weren't sure what their exact purpose of or why they were here or if any of that actually matters, but they kept on doing their thing the same as me. And so it was a very meaningful game in terms of that, but it's like, just in terms of what it did. So I guess a good way to say it is like what I just said. I explained why it was meaningful to me, and then as I grew up, I got to see just how meaningful it was just overall, because it wasn't just an important game to me. It was an important game to a lot of other people. It was an important game in gaming. It came out at a time where some of the stuff it was trying was unheard of. It came at a time where we were figuring out cutscenes, and what Kojima wanted to do was be more cinematic, and I think he achieved that there, and that changed the nature of gaming. Because you might get like a quick cutscene here or some just dialogue popping up, but something like Metal Gear Solid where it was like you were playing a movie, no, that was new. And so Metal Gear Solid is one of the most important games of all time, and I do think it is the most important game in the Metal Gear series, even though in theory that should be Metal Gear. But I think what it did that Metal Gear didn't was it got through to a lot of people. It was able to get pushed, in other countries as well as here. Is what people latched on to. Because you can go and you can play the Metal Gear 2 games now, and you can have yourself a good time. The gameplay is still fun, but the story is barely there. But if you know the story going in, what is there is a bit more meaningful, and I feel like you kind of get that through Metal Gear Solid. You might not have tried those games on their own if you knew they even existed in the first place, So I guess in short, Metal Gear Solid is a good bridge to what came before it and what came after it, and there's a lot of math that went in going from 2D to 3D. There's a lot of math in the story. There's a lot of math in the gameplay, in the production, in the development. There's a lot of math in everything when we're talking about Metal Gear Solid and really just life. So with that in mind, I'm gonna close this out like by once again saying Metal Gear Solid is one of my favorite games of all time. And if you've played it, if you enjoy Metal Gear, come talk to me about it. If you haven't played it, please do. It's an amazing game. It's dripping with atmosphere. It feels just like it's like its own unique thing, because it is. And just everything worked well. The cinematics, the voices, it feels unique. And again, because it is. Either way, I would really enjoy talking to people about Metal Gear Solid and the Metal Gear franchise in general, and how math is used in those things, or how math is used in life in general, or just talking about the games themselves. So have a great one. Professor Prime out. Metal Gear Solid rocks.